Hi, my name's Kate Ellis. I'm Labor's Shadow Minister for Early Childhood, and I am delighted to be here today, having just come from a really important announcement with Bill Shorten. We have heard how frustrated Australian families are about the costs of childcare and about the fact that the government promised that they would make childcare more affordable, but actually hasn't delivered a single thing in an entire parliamentary term. Well, we have good news from today. We have announced that if elected, we will not only increase the childcare benefit by 15%, which will of course ensure that all of those families, low and middle income, who are often struggling with the costs of care, will receive much needed increased subsidies. But we've also announced that we'll increase the childcare rebate cap. Currently at $7,500, we will raise this up to $10,000, and we know that this will have a real impact on families who are hitting the cap, and there's over 100,000 who are estimated to hit the cap. They're faced with a really hard decision. Do they go to work for basically no money, or do they reduce their days of participation in the workforce in order to look after their children? Well, Labor has announced that we'll fix that with the increased cap. The really good news is that whilst the government's childcare package has been delayed and will not come into effect for another 2 years, both of these measures will start on January the 1st next year, because we know Australian families have been waiting too long and that Australian families need relief now. Of course, it's not all just about affordability. We also made some really important announcements today about our critically important early childhood educators. This workforce is so important to our children's development, yet we know that at the moment the government has no ongoing national workforce strategy. We know that they have cut the only ongoing professional development funds, which have been in place for years. And also Labor has today announced that we will put money back into professional development, but also that in government we would make a submission to support early childhood educators in their case to increase their wages. We know that this is long overdue and really important, and I was proud to stand beside Bill as he made these announcements today.
Thanks, Kate. We've got over 100 people watching. Corey would like to know why the government's taken so long to implement their plan on childcare.
Well, I think frankly this just hasn't been a priority for the government. It was a priority to make big promises before the last election. It was a priority for Tony Abbott in his last days to say that he'd come up with a so-called Jobs and Families package. But we saw in the budget just before this election was called that the Turnbull government have pushed back the implementation of their package. So I'd say there's two answers to that question. One, it wasn't a priority, and two, the policy is an absolute mess. Independent modelling shows that even though the government wants to spend an additional $3 billion, they would make tens of thousands of Australian families worse off. So I think they're pretty keen to push that off for as long as possible.
And what's in it for educators, early childhood educators?
Well, we know that educators need to be valued as the professionals that they are, and that means that we need to make sure we have a strategy in place for the future. We've announced a national workforce strategy, but also that we will invest in ongoing professional development. And I'm sure that many educators will be saying, what's in it for me in terms of my pay packet? Well, there is a case that's going forward at the moment in order to increase the wages of our early childhood professionals. That will be decided by the independent body at Fair Work, but what we've said is that in government we would support, and we would put in a submission to support that claim, which is really important and something that the current government have failed to do.
What will it mean for family daycare?
Oh, family daycare is a really important part of the system, and they've had some really big budget cuts under the current government. What we've announced today is that we want to put $50 million back into family daycare so that we can work with Family Daycare Australia, particularly looking at how do we increase the compliance in the sector, but also how do we really tap into the flexibility in family daycare. We know that people's work is not 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and family daycare can offer some really good solutions for some families. So we want to work to increase that and work to enhance the family daycare sector.
Beth has said thank you very much as a childcare worker for taking us seriously. We're not just babysitters. Do you have any comments on that?
Oh, Beth, I would just say that we know that you're not just babysitters, as you put it. You are in charge of the most important Australians at the time when 90% of their brain development is occurring. I cannot say thank you enough to our early childhood professionals, and of course today it shows that it's not just about words, it's about actions, that we're going to show you just how grateful we are for the hard work that you do each and every day.
How will Labor invest in professional development to improve the quality of care?
Look, it's really important that we recognise that professional development needs to be ongoing, and we need to ensure that people can continue to learn from the latest research, the latest techniques. So we've announced $150 million in a professional development fund to make sure that not only do we have fantastic, committed and well qualified and educated early childhood professionals, but we continue to invest in them throughout their career. That's really important.
Great. And how will this, what will it mean for Indigenous kids?
When it comes to closing the gap, one of the smartest things that we can do is invest in early childhood education and care for Indigenous children. All of the research shows that that is one of the smartest ways that we can increase educational outcomes, health outcomes, social outcomes, a whole range of outcomes that will affect those children throughout their whole lives. Yet, sadly, we've seen that too many Indigenous children continue to slip between the cracks and not access these critical services. So today we've announced a significant increase for the budget-based funded services. These are the services which often operate in remote communities, in particularly disadvantaged communities. We're increasing that funding by 15%, but also providing funding for capital upgrades, because we want to make sure that every young Australian can have the best start to life, and that has to include some of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged Australians who live in remote Indigenous communities.
Thank you so much for joining us at CHQ, Kate. It's really great to have you drop by. Just for those who maybe weren't with us at the very beginning, could you just finish up by giving us a summary of this great announcement?
All right, I'm going to try and give you a brief summary on some really important announcements. Today we announced a part of our childcare policy which we are taking to the election, and I actually think it's one of the most important announcements of the election campaign. This is about delivering families assistance when they need it to make childcare more affordable. We've announced a 15% increase in the childcare benefit and an increase in the cap on the childcare rebate from $7,500 up to $10,000. We've also announced today funding support for family daycare, funding support for budget-based funded services, for mobile services, and also funding support for our amazing early childhood educators in terms of professional development and support for their submission before Fair Work Australia. The one other thing that we announced today is new measures to crack down on unjustified fee increases. We think it's really important that the announcements that we made today go towards benefiting those people who need it the most, and that is the families who we want to assist with the affordability of childcare. This is not about just providing more money to float around in the sector and boost profits of some providers.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks for having me.